The midday sun baked the hard-pan dirt of Bitter Creek into cracked porcelain. Cora Sterling's knuckles showed bone white against the walnut stock of the Winchester. A thin line of blood from her blistered palm soaked into the wood grain. 3 men stood on the other side of her broken fence, Mayor Boone's men. Their boots kicked up red dust that coated their spurs. "Put the iron down, little lady," the lead man. Miller spat tobacco juice near her boots. "We're just here to clear out the trash." Cora's finger rested on the trigger. The chamber was empty. She hadn't bought brass in 3 months. Her chest rose and fell in short, sharp hitches, but the barrel didn't waver. A shadow stretched across the yard, cutting through the glare. Silas Vance did not announce himself. His boots made no sound on the packed earth. He wore a canvas coat bleached by the sun, his hands hanging loose at his sides. No iron on his hip. 10 years since they ran him out of Redstone, and he came back carrying nothing but the dust on his shoulders. Miller laughed, hooking a thumb in his gun belt. "Well now, the ghost of Bitter Creek. You come back to die on your own dirt, Vance." Silas didn't look at him. He stopped at the property line. An old pair of rusted fencing pliers lay half buried in the dirt. Silas picked them up. The metal scraped against his calluses. He stepped to the rotting oak corner post. Miller took a heavy step forward, hand dropping to his Colt. Silas didn't flinch. He clamped the pliers onto the tensioned line of barbed wire holding the sagging fence together, right at the level of Miller's neck. Silas twisted his wrist. The wire shrieked as it pulled taut, the rusted barbs catching the light. "This corner post is hollowed out by rot," Silas said. His voice was gravel and low timber, quiet enough that the men had to strain to hear it. "You take one more step, the wood splinters. This tension line snaps back. The barb takes your throat out before your iron clears leather." Miller froze. The heel of his boot hovered an inch above the dirt. He looked at the post. The wood groaned under the unnatural tension Silas held with one hand. A sharp barb rested 3 inches from Miller's Adam's apple. Silence settled over the yard, heavy and suffocating. A horse stamped a hoof by the road. Silas held the pliers steady. His eyes locked on Miller's. Cold. Dead. Like looking down a dry well. Miller swallowed. He slowly pulled his boot back, planting it carefully away from the fence. He signaled his men with a jerk of his chin. They backed up, hands hovering near their belts, but nobody drew. "Dawn." Miller rasped, his face flushed dark under his hat. "Mayor Boone and Sheriff Langdon. They're bringing the writ, and they're bringing enough lead to bury both of you under this dead dirt." They turned and mounted their geldings, spurring them hard back toward Redstone. Silas watched the dust settle. He released the tension on the wire. The old wood settled with a dull creak. He tossed the pliers into the dirt and finally looked at Cora. The sun beat down on the empty yard, and the silence waiting for dawn was louder than a gunshot. The wind picked up off the ridge, carrying the chill of a dry night. Inside the drafty walls of the main cabin, Cora sat on a 3-legged stool. A lantern burned low, throwing long shadows against the raw timber. Her right hand rested in her lap, fingers curled tight around the staghorn handle of a skinning knife. Silas Vance did not sit. He stood near the open doorway, a silhouette against the moonlight. The town called him a butcher, a thief. For 10 years, the name Vance was something men spat on the ground to curse. He didn't offer a word to dispute it. He just looked at the room. He stepped out onto the dirt porch. Cora followed, keeping a good 6 feet between them. The knife stayed flat against her thigh. Silas walked to the edge of the yard, where the new well sat. He knelt, running a calloused thumb over the stones lining the rim. They were heavy, flat river rocks stacked without mortar, but wedged so tight a blade couldn't fit between the seams. He traced the pulley rig. Rough-hewn pine notched and pegged. No iron nails. "You cut these joints." His voice was rough like two stones grinding together. "With a dull draw knife," Cora said. Her thumb stroked the hilt of her blade. Silas turned from the well and walked toward the sagging barn. The heavy oak doors hung off their rusted iron hinges, groaning with every gust of wind. If the town came, they would need the barn secured, a place to funnel them, a barricade. Silas put his shoulder against the fallen right door. It weighed near 300 pounds of solid waterlogged oak. The muscles in his neck corded. He drove his boots into the dirt and heaved. The wood scraped over the hardpan, lifting inch by inch until it slammed into the upright frame. He held it there with his weight, but the iron latch was gone. The door would fall the second he stepped away. Cora didn't think. She shoved the knife into her belt, grabbed a length of hemp rope from the fence rail, and stepped into his space. She smelled dried sweat, old canvas, and wood smoke on him. She threw the rope over the crossbeam, caught the trailing end, and whipped it through the iron ring on the door. Her blistered hands moved in a blur. A half hitch crossed over, pulled back through the bite. She locked it down hard. She leaned her weight back, digging her heels into the dirt, and pulled the tension taut. Silas stepped back. The heavy door didn't give a fraction of an inch. He looked at the knot. Then he looked at her hands. The knuckles were split, the skin rough as tree bark. Slowly, Silas raised his eyes to hers. He gave a single short nod. No apologies for his reputation. No pity for her stolen money. Just the silent recognition of a woman who knew how to bleed for her ground. Cora let her breath out. The stiffness in her shoulders dropped. She reached into her apron, pulled out a second coil of rope, and tossed it to him. He caught it one-handed. They worked for 2 hours in the dark, reinforcing the windows, barricading the rear exit. The only sound was the scrape of wood and the tightening of hemp. Then Silas stopped. He dropped a timber beam. Cora froze. She felt it through the soles of her boots before she heard it. A low, heavy vibration. Over the northern ridge, the sky flickered with heat lightning, but the sound wasn't thunder. It was steady, rhythmic, beating against the dry earth. Silas turned toward the dirt track leading back to Redstone. "Hoofbeats," he said quietly. They weren't waiting for dawn. The town was bringing the fire tonight. Dawn broke like a bruised eye over the ridge, casting a sickly yellow light across the hardpan. The yard at Bitter Creek was choked with horses. 20 men deputies and hired guns sat their saddles in a tight half-circle around the cabin. Mayor Boone sat in the center on a tall, dapple gray. He wore a clean broadcloth suit that had no business in the frontier dust. Next to him, Sheriff Langdon rested a double-barrel 10-gauge across his saddle horn. Silas and Cora stood on the dirt porch, outnumbered 10-1. Boone reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of heavy parchment. He didn't ride forward to hand it over. He simply let go of it. The wind caught the paper, tumbling it into the horse tracks and red dirt near Cora's boots. "Foreclosure and eviction," Boone said. His voice was loud, projecting for his men to hear. "Signed by the county judge yesterday afternoon. You bought bad paper from a swindler, Miss Sterling. You own nothing. This land belongs to the Redstone Bank." Cora stared at the white paper sitting in the dirt. 3 months of bleeding hands. The well she had dug stone by stone. The roof she had patched. Wiped out by a forged signature. "You're nothing but a crazy scavenger," Boone sneered, pointing a gloved finger at her. "Playing homesteader in the dirt. You've been trespassing since the day you got here." Boone shifted his gaze to Silas. A slow, ugly smile spread across his jaw. "And look what the scavenger dug up. 10 years, Vance. We whipped you out of Redstone like a stray dog. I figure it makes sense you'd come crawling back to die on a dead patch of dirt with a failed woman. 2 pieces of trash rotting together." The men in the posse laughed. It was a harsh scraping sound that echoed off the dry timber of the barn. They looked down the barrels of their rifles, stripping away every ounce of dignity Cora had bled into this soil. Cora's fingers dug into her skirt, inches from her knife. She looked at Silas. Silas did nothing. His hands hung loose and empty at his sides. His jaw was slack. His eyes were flat and hollow. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't speak. He just stood there taking the weight of their mockery like a dead tree taking the wind. The silence from the man they called a monster felt like a crushing weight. To the posse, it was absolute submission. The great Silas Vance broken and beaten by the law. The air in the yard grew suffocating with the sheer, unapologetic injustice of it. The law, the guns, the money, Boone held it all, and he was grinding their faces into the mud just because he could. Sheriff Langdon swung down from his horse. His heavy boots crunched on the gravel. He walked right past Silas, treating him like a ghost, and headed straight for the barn. The barn Cora had spent weeks repairing. The barn filled with the winter hay she had cut by hand. Langdon stopped by the heavy oak door. He pulled a thick lucifer match from his vest pocket. He dragged the red head against the rusted iron hinge. The flame flared sharp and yellow, hissing in the morning quiet. The bitter smell of sulfur cut through the dust. Langdon lowered the burning match toward the dry hay spilling from the bottom of the door. He didn't look at the barn. He looked right at Cora, waiting for her to break. The sulfur match slipped from Sheriff Langdon's fingers. It fell in a slow tumble, a sharp orange spark dropping toward the dry winter hay banked against the heavy oak doors. A fraction of a second later, 10 lever-action rifles racked in unison. The mechanical clack of steel echoed across the yard like dry bones snapping. 10 muzzles leveled squarely at Silas Vance's chest. "Go on," Miller breathed, squinting down the iron sights of his carbine. "Twitch. Give us a reason." They didn't just want an eviction. They wanted an execution. They wanted the ghost of Redstone bleeding out in the dirt, legally put down for resisting a badge. The match hit the hay. A thin ribbon of gray smoke curled upward. Cora stared at the white parchment lying in the dust. The law was a lie written in ink enforced by lead. She had nothing left. No money, no deed, no future. They were going to burn her sweat to ash and shoot down the only man who had looked at her blistered hands and seen worth. She moved. She stepped squarely in front of Silas, planting her boots in the red dirt. She jerked the empty Winchester to her shoulder, pulling the hammer back with her thumb. The barrel swept across the line of deputies, steady as stone. Mayor Boone let out a dry, rattling laugh from his saddle. "Well, look at that. The scavenger dies for the stray." Boone tilted his head toward Miller. "Put a piece of lead past his ear. Let her smell the powder." Miller adjusted his aim and squeezed. The gunshot deafened the yard. The bullet didn't just pass his ear. It clipped Silas's left shoulder, tearing through the heavy canvas coat and biting deep into the muscle. Silas didn't stagger. He didn't even flinch, but dark, heavy blood immediately welled up, staining the bleached fabric running down his sleeve to drip into the dust. Cora's breath hitched. Her arms trembled under the weight of the rifle. The smoke from the hay was growing thicker, stinging her eyes. Her finger tightened on the trigger. If it clicked on an empty chamber, 10 men would open fire and tear them both to pieces. She squeezed her eyes shut. She pulled her finger back. A heavy, calloused hand clamped down over the hot steel barrel of her rifle. It was Silas. His grip was absolute. Warm blood from his shoulder slicked his knuckles. He stepped forward, putting his body completely between Cora and the 10 guns, and slowly, deliberately forced the muzzle of her rifle down to the dirt. The thick smoke from the hay bit at the back of Silas's throat. He kept his uninjured hand clamped over the barrel of Cora's Winchester, forcing the iron to the dirt. Blood from his shoulder dripped onto her white knuckles. Warm and heavy, he let go of her rifle. Silas walked past her, stepping directly into the path of 10 loaded carbines. He didn't rush. He didn't stagger. He dragged his heavy boot over the smoking pile of hay, grinding the embers into the hardpan until the fire died in a smear of black ash. Sheriff Langdon's hand hovered over his Colt. Mayor Boone's horse sidestepped, spooked by the smell of burnt sulfur and fresh blood. 10 guns, Silas said. His voice was flat, carrying easily in the dry air. For a dead patch of dirt. He looked up at Boone. Your county map, Mayor. Where does it say the southeast boundary marker sits? Boone narrowed his eyes. By the creek bed. Same as it's been for 50 years, Vance. Wrong, Silas said. It's a wrought iron spike driven 3 feet into solid limestone 40 yards past the creek. Silas reached his right hand inside his canvas coat. 3 deputies tightened their fingers on their triggers, the steel clicking in the quiet yard. Silas moved slow. He withdrew a folded piece of heavy vellum, stiff and yellowed. He flicked it open with a snap of his wrist. At the bottom of the page, a thick circle of red wax caught the morning sun. The seal of the United States General Land Office. County judges don't sign patents on federal territory, Silas said. He held the paper up. I bought this section direct from the federal government 10 years ago, Boone. Paid in gold before they ever pinned that tin star on Langdon's chest. Boone's face turned the color of spoiled milk. He stared at the red wax. The forged county eviction paper lying in the dirt was suddenly worth less than the dust covering it, and the Homestead Act requires improvement to hold the patent. Silas continued, turning his dead eyes to the sheriff. He pointed a blood-stained finger toward the new stone well, then to the heavy barn door Cora had secured. Miss Sterling ain't a squatter. She's my legal agricultural manager. She dug that well. That makes it a federal land improvement. The wind whipped across the yard. The metallic clack of a hammer being carefully lowered sounded like a cannon shot. One of the hired guns dropped his rifle barrel an inch. Then another. Silas took a step closer to Langdon's horse. You drop another match on federal property, Langdon Boone's judge won't save you. The U.S. Marshals will ride down from Denver and hang you and every man in this posse from the Redstone trestle bridge. The absolute certainty in his voice hit the posse like a physical blow. The law they thought they owned had just morphed into a federal noose around their necks. Boone swallowed hard, his gloved hands trembling on the reins. The absolute power he brought to Bitter Creek had just been crushed by a piece of 10-year-old parchment and a woman's blistered hands. Chapter 6, De Che Tinglang. The hammer of Miller's carbine clicked as he eased it down. It was a small metallic sound, but it broke the fever in the yard. One by one, the hired guns lowered their rifles. They looked at the heavy parchment in Silas's hand, then at the smoking black scar on the dirt where the hay had burned. Nobody wanted a federal rope. Mayor Boone's jaw worked, grinding on words he couldn't afford to say. His clean broadcloth suit suddenly looked cheap, coated in the red dust of a property he didn't own. He yanked hard on the leather reins, turning his tall gray horse away from the cabin. Ride out, Boone ordered. His voice was thin, stripped of the heavy authority he brought with him. Sheriff Langdon didn't look at Silas. He didn't look at Cora. He stared straight ahead at the scrub brush as he mounted his horse, pulling his hat down low over his eyes. The posse turned their mounts and spurred them hard back down the rutted track toward Redstone. The thunder of their hoofbeats faded, swallowed by the vast, empty stretch of the plains. The morning wind swept across the yard, carrying away the last bitter smell of burnt sulfur. Silas stood in the dirt. His left sleeve was dark and heavy with blood, the fabric clinging to his arm, but he didn't check the bullet wound. He carefully folded the federal patent with his right hand and slid it back into the inner pocket of his canvas coat. He didn't watch the dust trail of Boone's men. They didn't matter. He turned his back to the road. He looked at the heavy oak doors of the barn, still securely lashed by Cora's knot. He looked at the stone well she had built rock by rock with bleeding hands. Then he looked at her. Cora lowered the empty Winchester. The shaking in her shoulders finally stopped. She didn't drop the iron. She held it steady by her side, her breathing slowing, as the silence of the frontier settled back over the land. Silas walked over to the thick timber beam he had dropped when the hoofbeats first approached the night before. He picked up his rusted framing hammer from the dust. He tested the weight of the iron head in his uninjured hand. "Sun's burning off the chill," Silas said. His voice dropped back to that low, grinding rumble. He nodded toward the stacked lumber near the house. "You want to finish bracing that porch roof or patch the fence line they cut?" Cora let out a long breath. The tension bled out of her spine into the hard pan. She looked at the man the town called a monster. He wasn't asking for gratitude. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering the only thing that held any real weight in this brutal country: partnership. She leaned the Winchester against the rough timber of the cabin wall. She walked to the dirt porch, bent down, and picked up a heavy iron bucket of square-cut nails. "The porch," Cora said, walking to stand beside him. "The fence can wait." Silas gave a single short nod. He set the heavy timber against the upright post, ignoring the fresh blood seeping through his coat. The sharp, clean ring of the iron hammer striking the nail echoed across the empty yard. It was a steady, heavy beat under the open sky. The sound of a foundation taking root in the dirt, driving deep into the rock, louder and stronger than any law in Redstone.